Pivot Airlines, who were just released from the Dominican Republic, are likely very glad to be back in Canada. They landed in Toronto last night. The 2 pilots, 2 flight attendants, and 1 maintenance engineer were detained last April after 200 kilos of coke were found on their plane. Now, the story hasn't received much attention in the months since, certainly nothing like what we saw the 2 Michaels get, who were detained, albeit for a much longer period of time in China, even though the pilots have reported that their lives for them and the crew were, quote, like a living nightmare. But after 7 months, they're home. And in his statement of gratitude, the CEO of Pivot Airline, Eric Edmondson, made special mention of one Newfoundland politician in particular, Senator David Wells. Welcome to On the Go.
Thank you, Anthony.
Now, this story was very strange from the start. Maybe we can just go back in time a bit. Why was this crew held in the Dominican Republic?
So on April 5th, it was a Pivot flight. Pivot's a charter airline. It used to be known as Georgian Airlines. They were flying from Colombia to Canada, but they had to stop in Punta Cana. They had to change their crew. So one crew left and another crew was inbound and at their hotel. When they went to the plane the next day, one of the technicians was doing a pre-departure check on the plane, looked in the avionics bay and found the 210 kilos of cocaine. He didn't know what it was, but he knew he shouldn't be there, and that's where it began.
And was there ever any reason to believe that they were responsible for the drugs?
Maybe in the beginning when it was unknown, the origin, although they were the ones that notified the RCMP, they were the ones that notified Pivot Airlines, they were the one that notified the Dominican authorities. So I think at that point you would think that they're not that they weren't involved.
And so what did they go through after that?
In the Dominican Republic, the law says you can detain witnesses as well as perpetrators. Of course, they didn't have the perpetrators. They detained the witnesses, accused them of perpetrating this crime, and jailed them for 9 days. And they were jailed with drug traffickers, members of cartels. And while they were in prison, Anthony, they were threatened with their lives. And in fact, at one point, a dead body was put outside their cell door, and they were told, "You will be next."
Good Lord. What an ordeal. Now, how did you get involved in all this?
So I had heard about it, and as you said, opening this piece, was surprised that it wasn't getting more play. And in fact, when I talked to one of the crew members last night in Toronto when they arrived, they said they called their spouse and said, we're delayed, but we'll be home in 48 hours. So even they didn't think it was that significant an event because, they notified the authorities, the drugs were removed. So I had heard about it and was curious that it wasn't getting more play. And as the days and weeks continued, I would inquire with Pivot Airlines, what's the status? And there was never any change. Their passports were seized, so they couldn't leave the country. They were having threats from the cartels, so they were in fact moving from safe house to safe house, but they didn't want to make this a big public story because they felt threatened enough. And so to shine light on drug cartels, maybe not a good career move, and that's how it continued to play out.
And come with some obviously potential risk, especially after you described the horrific events that happened behind bars. Now, you raised some questions about this in the upper chamber in the Senate. What was your thinking about the issue here?
So first of all, I wouldn't have raised the questions in our Senate question period. I wouldn't have brought them up publicly had I not had the okay from Pivot Airlines. I didn't want to jeopardize the process. I didn't want to jeopardize the crew. So I was in constant contact with Eric Edmondson, the president of Pivot, just to make sure that I didn't want to trip up any of the processes that they were undertaking. And they were doing a lot of work behind the scenes with Canadian law enforcement, Dominican law enforcement, the prosecutor's office,
Right.
and others. So I didn't want to trip that up. But when it was clear that nothing was happening, and certainly the Canadian government, I think, bears much responsibility on this. When I saw that there was nothing happening, and when Pivot confirmed, look, it's deadlocked. They have their passports seized. The Dominican law says they can be held for 12 months before they can be released, and that's just as witnesses. That's when I started bringing some public light to it,
right,
by asking questions in question period to the government representatives.
No, it's almost something like out of a movie, but so it turns out that one of the pivotal moments in all this was determining that the drugs were planted.
So in or around, so all this began in April, early April. Around August, it became known to me that there was a video, airport video, of someone loading the drugs onto the flight, 3:00 in the morning. At the same time, of course, the crew was at the hotel, and that was proven.
So this would be a key piece of evidence.
This is a complete exoneration of the crew.
Yeah.
If nothing else, of course, the way it works in the Dominican Republic, they don't want these types of things made public. It's a their big income is tourism, and 1 million Canadians go there a year. 30% of their tourism income are Canadians, and this is not a story that they wanted to come to light, in my view.
Right.
But it was clear evidence, and when I learned of this video, at the next opportunity, that was in August. So at the next opportunity, and in fact, it was Transport Minister Al Gabra, who I knew had a copy of the video. The Department of Transport had a copy of the video. And when he came to Senate question period, I asked him, I said, with this evidence in hand, what is the government doing to bring these Canadians home? And I said, Canada doesn't have a great track record in advocating for Canadians illegally detained abroad. And that brought it even further to light. And it was just a few short weeks after that the wheels started to turn in the Dominican Republic. And it's less known that Eric Edmondson and I, and the unions that were involved, I had arranged a press conference to bring greater light to this. I was going to call on the government of Canada to suspend the bilateral agreement that we have with the Dominican Republic on flights in and flights out. And in fact, I was going to go a step further and suggest that Canadians reconsider their travel plans.
I'm going to ask you a question, but I know if you asked me this question, I would tell you no comment. How'd you get the video?
No comment.
I had a feeling. What a story. Senator David Wells, appreciate your time.
You're very welcome.
All right. Some drama from the Dominican Republic that ends well for a Canadian crew that was returned to Canada last night. You're listening to On the Go. It's time for the